Hi, it's Dr. Ann Metz, and this is The Psychedelic Skeptic, where we believe nothing is the cure for everything. If it's your first time here, I'm a licensed therapist, counseling professor, and in fact, a psychedelic therapist. But I'm also a skeptic when it comes to some of the claims around psychedelic medicine, and that's what I'm here to explore. Today on the show, Chris Young, SoulQuest Church, and the wrongful death of Brandon Begley.
One of the things the defense argued at trial, as you would expect, is that, this is a rare case. It hardly ever happens. Thank God. Let's hope it doesn't happen, because this was so egregious on a condition that really just requires a little sodium, which means if you gave him some salt water, you put a bag of saline on him early enough, not a medical issue that's going to take your life. And that's one of the things our emergency medicine and medical toxicology experts said. The cure rate for this condition is over 90% if treated timely. And that's where this whole case went sideways.
Today's episode contains one of the most important and difficult conversations I've had on this show. I'm speaking with John Paul Begley and William Chapman, Esquire, about the death of Brandon Begley, a 22-year-old who lost his life at SoulQuest Church in Orlando, Florida in 2018. Brandon suffered fatal complications after participating in Ayahuasca ceremonies at SoulQuest. His father, John Paul, and attorney William Chapman successfully pursued a wrongful death case against SoulQuest and its founder, Chris Young, resulting in a $15 million wrongful death verdict. While the legal victory was significant, the deeper story reveals troubling questions about oversight, accountability, and safety in psychedelic churches. Before we begin, I need to acknowledge some audio issues in this recording. While the quality isn't what we aim for, I made the decision to release this episode anyway because Brandon's story and the insights shared by his father and attorney are too important not to be heard. As both a therapist and podcaster, I found myself deeply moved by John Paul's courage in sharing his devastating loss, and by William's dedication to pursuing justice for Brandon. Their story raises crucial questions about safety standards and accountability in psychedelic spaces. What you're about to hear may be upsetting. It certainly was for me. But it's also an essential conversation for anyone interested in psychedelics, particularly as we see the continued growth of psychedelic churches across the United States. If you wouldn't mind, John Paul, could you tell us a little bit about Brandon? What was he like?
Brandon's a very joyful young man.
Really?
My best friend.
Oh.
Very close relationship from the time he was a very young boy, or a baby. He was daddy's little boy, so just a very good person.
It sounded like he was, from what I've read about him, he's been very interested in music and in golf and being with friends and enjoying his family.
When someone asked me about Brandon and asked me to describe Brandon, like you just have, the feelings that come over me, it's hard. I don't know how to describe my son in a way. Yes, he was an athlete. He was an extreme athlete. He was a musician, a self-taught musician. He's an artist. He's a people person. He was a hard worker. He's just a very, very, very good person. He loved his family. He was just a very loving human being. That was his legacy, in my opinion. That's what he was all about, was love.
I can see how hard it is to describe someone who you have known so well and loved so much. But thank you for sharing just a little piece of what he was like. No one, I think, can ever be summed up in a quick question like that. So thank you.
Thanks for asking me.
Yeah.
I wish you could have known him.
I wish I could have known him too. And I hope that, the things that we talk about today are a way of honoring who he was and of keeping him alive, I think, certainly is my hope. In my own head, as I've been thinking about him, I imagine he was a seeker, that he was a young man who was artistic and was curious and, was wanting to experience life. But as you understand it, how did he come to be involved with SoulQuest?
Along his journey, like you were saying, he was a seeker. the information that is at our fingertips these days, you can be directed towards something that you like very easily. So upon his journey and his discoveries, I'm sure somewhere along the line, the algorithm pushed him towards that facility.
So it was something as simple as a Google search, you imagine?
I would imagine it started somewhere like that.
Yeah, I was once 22 and experimental myself. And I think as I've been thinking about his life and this case, I think that's kind of one of the places I come back to, that it's a very understandable direction to have gone in. And I think that that makes it all the more tragic that you're a young person and you're vulnerable and you have this authority figure in the person of Chris Young. And how would you know to be doubtful of the things that he's saying or to scrutinize it in that way?
I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I wonder maybe if we can shift slightly and talk about an overview of the timeline in this process of losing Brandon tragically to the place that we're at right now.
Where we're at.
Sure. Yeah, unfortunately, I am intimately knowledgeable of the timeline that took place. Basically, Brandon went to SoulQuest for the first time in February of 2018. And when he went up there, he went there for a 3-day retreat, did ayahuasca exclusively, came back home, told his dad about the experience, said it was enlightening, opened his eyes up. It was a very joyous experience. He actually liked SoulQuest quite a bit. And when I had the conversations initially with Mr. Begley in my office when the tragedy happened and he was looking for legal representation, I was completely oblivious to the psychedelic community. I had no idea what ayahuasca was. I'm not the person that dabbles in any type of hallucinogenic substances. I'm not an anti-drug crusader. A lot of people think that I am, but I'm not. The thing that struck me so much about Brandon's tragedy was just the egregiousness of what took place the second retreat when Brandon went back 1 month later. After the February 23rd, 2018 retreat, when Brandon came home, he decided to go back a second time. And that second time was from March 30th to April 1st, 2018. That was the Easter weekend, and Brandon wouldn't return. His dad basically was operating one of the prestigious golf courses here in the Palm Beach County area. Brandon enjoyed working with his dad. He had gotten an opportunity to be closer with him. He moved down from his mom in Indianapolis to spend more time with his father, and they were getting closer. Brandon was 22 at the time. This young man got his whole life ahead of him. And he thought that going back to SoulQuest would provide him with certain answers that he was looking for spiritually. And he really was looking forward to the experience. And even Mr. Begley had some reservations because he knew how much it cost to attend the retreat. It was expensive. Mm-hmm. And for someone of Brandon's means, Brandon was working multiple jobs. He was caddying for his dad. He was driving for local pizza companies, delivering pizza. He was a hardworking kid. And to pay $900 to attend a retreat for a couple nights, it's expensive. So John Paul, being the concerned dad that he was, he's like, Brandon, how about we slow it down after this last experience? Go get your answers, get the spiritual guidance that you're looking for, and then let's think about something else. And Brandon was in agreement. Unfortunately, we never got the chance to have him come home and try to move forward. So he gets to SoulQuest on Friday afternoon. John Paul decided to cut him loose a little early that day from the golf course so that he could make his arrangements and get up to Orlando from the Palm Beach, Martin County area. Brandon was living in Stewart at the time, which is just north of where we are here in West Palm Beach by about an hour. So it'd probably take him about 90 minutes to get to Orlando. And John Paul didn't have enough time, didn't want to have him to race before the ceremony started. Brandon gets up there, apparently checks in, has no issues with regard to checking in. After we got into litigation to find out that one of the things Chris Young and SoulQuest through Chris Young were putting out into the public through Netflix was that Brandon had misled and lied to them about a medical condition that he allegedly had, which he never did. During the course of the litigation, we were able to ferret that out and show that there was no evidence to support anything along those lines because it was just a red herring. It was an opportunity for Chris Young and SoulQuest to try to put the blame on Brandon for something that they should have reacted to and gotten him help timely. But Brandon gets there Friday, does the ayahuasca session that night. No one really knows how much ayahuasca they gave to him because Chris never kept track of the amounts of the cups that were given. There's no real record of any type of dosing of just how strong that ayahuasca was. And I guess as the lawyer, I was asking for too much specifics because he kind of looked at me and said, we're not a pharmacy, we're not a chemistry. Seth, what are you talking about? Well, we kept track somewhere. We have it written down. Okay, where is it? I don't have it. All right, well, doesn't the DEA want you to have all that stuff? Yeah, they do. We keep really good notes. So Brandon does that ceremony, wakes up the next morning, does an afternoon ceremony on Saturday, March 31st, 2018. Apparently that session went pretty well. According to one of the observers, one of the facilitators, he said that Brandon stayed in the circle longer than some of the other people. Okay. That night, Brandon does his third ayahuasca session, Saturday night, March 31st. Again, things seem to be fine. There's no notation of any type of adverse consequences that were resulting, no notations of them. Two of the lead facilitators, one of which I wanted to depose, tried to depose, took the Fifth Amendment. She actually was involved in the facilitation of the ayahuasca. Essentially, Mr. Young said, that this woman led ceremony. She was the one that was responsible for it. Great, let's talk to her and see what happened. Had an informal conversation with her before her deposition, before she was represented by the Criminal Defense Counsel, and she gave me a pretty resounding explanation that the next day on April 1st, Easter Sunday, after Brandon participated in a kambo session, Brandon just wasn't right. And he got progressively worse and deteriorated over the course of 4 hours. As soon as she found him on the floor inside the house, I don't know if you're familiar with SoulQuest's operation or how they were set up, but basically it's a 4.5 acre plot of land in a very rural area of Orlando and Orange County, where there is a single family home residence that was the structure within which the church operated. And it's basically just a house, a 4-bedroom house. And there's a common area like your living room. At 5 p.m., this individual was summoned because one of the participants saw Brandon on his side unconscious. This was hours after the kambo session and the day after the ayahuasca session, the third that he participated in. And at that point in time, this lead facilitator told me informally that she believed Brandon needed immediate medical assistance at that point. And she tried to persuade Mr. Young, who was the only person on site or on staff at SoulQuest, who claimed to be a medical professional. Chris was trained as an EMT, but never formally practiced. His certification in the state of Florida had been outdated by, I believe, more than 7 to 8 years. And he admitted in deposition that he had no idea what severe acute hyponatremia was. So when I said to him, did you know what you were looking at in terms of the symptoms that you were seeing? I had no idea what it was. Well, of course not. And that's why there was such a delay in getting Brandon the help that he needed, because essentially Brandon was suffering from low blood sodium due to essentially the water consumption, the ayahuasca consumption, and the kambo session. Basically, the experts in our case all agree, with the exception of one defense expert, that the ayahuasca played a very substantial role in Brandon's production of antidiuretic hormone. There's a abnormal condition called syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone production, which basically what that does is it causes a metabolic reaction where your cellular structures absorb water. They won't release the water. So on its own accord, your body is naturally diluting the sodium that's in your system. And if that is allowed to persist for too long, you get the cellular swelling because you have too much water in the cells. The example that I used at the trial is kind of a crude example, but is a water balloon. What happens when you fill a water balloon up to its maximum capacity? The water balloon bursts. That's essentially what happened to Brandon with his brain, with this condition allowed to persist over several hours. Essentially what he needed was a reversal of that condition. He needed to have sodium put back into his system and stabilized so that the swelling would discontinue. And the longer you allow this process to devolve, the greater your chances of mortality. And that was really our position against SoulQuest and Mr. Young, was that the over 3-hour delay after finding him at 5 p.m. unconscious on the floor, not calling for help until 8:11 p.m., and then getting the medics out there was just too late. At that point in time, Brandon suffered a massive seizure. His brain had essentially herniated and ruptured, and he wasn't coming back. They got him to the hospital after the medics worked on him for 30 minutes on site, transported him to Florida Hospital East Orlando on April 1st, 2018. He remained hospitalized in the intensive care unit for the next 3 days, and on April 4th, 2018, life-saving measures were withdrawn after a very difficult conversation between healthcare professionals, most notably the neurologist that was treating Brandon, John Paul, and Brandon's mom, Holly Cat. And I always said to John Paul and Holly, and Holly is someone who has wanted to remain outside of the publicity of the case. This has dramatically affected her. John Paul is able to talk about it coherently. The pain is there and it's obvious, but he's able to at least have a conversation. Holly almost couldn't testify at trial. That's how much this has affected her. She says it's completely destroyed her life. But I can't imagine the two of them having to be in Orlando with the neurologist telling them, your son's not coming back. He's gone. Even though his body is so healthy and strong that if you keep him on life support, he will survive, but he is gone. He's not there anymore. His brain is essentially dead. And they had to make a decision on the 4th, which was Brandon's wishes. Brandon did not want to be prolonged. And one of the most amazing things about this young man, he was an organ donor. What John Paul and Holly wanted for Brandon was to be able to donate back the organs that they could salvage from him. And they salvaged just about everything they could so that other people could get the benefit of Brandon's legacy. Young to Holly and to John Paul. That was another really bizarre set of circumstances because John Paul had to come from Wellington, Florida, which is out in West Palm Beach County, which is about 2.5 hours from Orlando, and scour all of the hospital emergency rooms looking for his son because Mr. Young was unable to provide him with the name of the hospital that his son was being emergently transported
on a wild goose chase. And then they also admitted Brandon as a John Doe. He didn't even tell him his name.
Oh my gosh.
It was very bizarre. I've never seen anything like it. And Holly got the call initially from Mr. Young because Mr. Young said Holly was the emergency contact on the information. Holly is in Indiana, so what she basically said is, look, Brandon's dad is local. You need to call him. And Mr. Young never gave Holly any information as to where Brandon was being. John Paul and Holly began making phone calls to every emergency room in the area.
I finally got a call back. I started driving towards Orlando, and I got a call from one of the doctors saying, I think this might be your son here. You better get here as fast as you can.
The level of callousness and cruelty in that is just, I'm without words.
That was one of the things that really caught me off guard when I met with Mr. Begley in the office. Someone who provides substances which are considered unsafe by virtue of being Schedule 1. Let's assume that they're not, or they may be, whatever the argument may be. But the fact that they're on that schedule, and the fact that they do have complications, potentially, most notably the vomiting, the purging effect that it can have. As someone who has any medical knowledge or training, you should have some understanding that if you see an adverse complication that someone's experiencing, you might want to be certain about how dire that condition is before you just dismiss it. And I kept asking Mr. Begley, I'm like, 3 hours, over 3 hours, they just left or something like that? And he said, this is the information that I'm gathering that I've gotten through the investigation from the journalism and from the police. And I'm thinking to myself, this just can't be the case.
I did all that on my own.
And that was another kind of disappointment with the case is the investigation that was done by the police department, the Orange County Sheriff's Office,
hardly was one.
That they really didn't understand what they were dealing with. And the homicide detective who was on the verge of retirement it was an area of complication that I just don't think he wanted to venture into. And one of the other things that seems to be difficult for everyone in the legal community on a case like this one is the RFRA impacts and the religiosity, the religious freedom issue. There seemed to be a lot of hesitation by law enforcement and even the judicial system that they didn't want to wade into that area. Now, the federal judiciary, totally different. When they dealt with SoulQuest's religious petition for exemption and rejected it, I thought the analysis was pretty strong and solid, and there was no fear. In our state trial, there were many legal rulings where essentially my hand was tied behind my back. I wasn't allowed to refer to the illegality of the substance, even after the Drug Enforcement Administration's determination, because the trial court did not want to get into a RFRA issue, didn't want to deal with that constitutional question if it was possible to avoid it. So it created a lot of nuance, but sort of getting ahead of myself.
We're trying to try this case and trying to get down to the basics and then the facts and the matters and into the root cause of the problem and the situation. We're not even allowed to do that. We're not even allowed to do that. We can't even talk about it. No, you can't even talk about that. No, you can't even say those words. You can't even say the words illegal. You can't even say the words because the trial system, the system doesn't want to deal with it. But it's not a separate issue. It is the issue at hand. These are the people that we're dealing with. This is the business that we're dealing with. This is the person that we're dealing with. And it's all encompassing. So how can you leave out specific details of this encompassing case when these details are the finite details that you need to get resolution over here and to get justice over here? But you're not doing that because why?
Wow.
I don't understand the system. It comes down to one person sitting behind a desk going, no, you can't say that, or yes, you can say that. I still don't understand the system. It's been very disappointing to me how they have let us down and they have given leeway. They're giving them leeway. They're giving them leverage. They just keep giving it to them instead of taking it from them, like the federal courts have done, saying they saw right through it. And they're like, hey, we see what this is. That's illegal. That is illegal operation. Why isn't that being done at the state level? Why isn't that being done through our judicial system down here with the sheriffs and with the people who can actually go knock on the door and arrest somebody, who actually have the physical capabilities of doing that? It's not happening. This man is responsible for the death of my child. This business is responsible for the death of my child. And he's free. He's a free man. I don't understand. I'm very upset. Our family is very upset. We're destroyed. Every day is Groundhog's Day for me. It doesn't get any better.
Somehow, because he declares, Chris Young and SoulQuest declare that they're a church, they're really, it sounds in a lot of ways, immune from responsibility in what feels like a criminal matter. I mean, I'm a therapist. If someone died in my office on my watch and they found that I deviated from the standard practice of care, there would be criminal charges and there would be malpractice charges. And
there would.
Yes. Am I understanding that right?
Like, I don't understand, right? Like, how can this business get the permission to do this? And they say, okay, well, we're a church. We need your permission to do this. We're a church. And this is what we're going to do. Okay, well, you have to get permission first. You declare that you're a church. You declare what you're going to do. You ask for permission. You don't do it until you get permission. These people have declared what they are. We're going to do what we do. We don't have your permission yet. So come and stop us. Come and stop us. We're going to do it until you come and stop us. You've told us no. You've told us not to do it. But you haven't knocked on our door yet. So you know what? We're going to keep doing it. Why wouldn't they?
From a legal perspective, the analogy, the comparison that you've given, it is consistent with the position we've taken, but our case is a little different than the malpractice circumstance that you're referring to. To rise to the level of criminality, there has to be something a little bit more than just simple negligence. In the circumstances of a civil case, if you have what's called culpable negligence in Florida, that can be charged as a crime. One of the things that we have been arguing in favor of is that the amount of delay that took place and the fact that Brandon was given a Schedule 1 controlled substance and there was over hours of time to get him help, that would be to the level of culpable negligence that would warrant a criminal charge, if not only for culpable negligence, possibly for murder because you gave him a Schedule 1 controlled substance. Where it gets somewhat murky on the murder issue is whether or not there was some exemption from a religious perspective, which we know as of April 16th of 2021, Drug Enforcement Administration said, no, you're not exempt. You're not a sincere religion. And even if you were, you're not safe enough to be allowed to administer this particular substance. So we're not giving you the exemption. And that particular determination, which SoulQuest tried to take into the federal judiciary through a declaratory judgment action, was dismissed. The 11th Circuit affirms the lower court and basically says the dismissal was appropriate. So they're done on that claim. And the DEA's determination of no exemption to the Controlled Substances Act was also upheld at the 11th Circuit. So those appeals have been finalized. One of our positions now is that the time that the trial was finalized, it was illegal. There was no question that what was going on there was an illegality. We weren't able to try that issue in the underlying state case because at the time, the federal issues weren't finalized from an appellate perspective. But that's why that wasn't actually tried at that level. But yes, to answer the analogy that you put out there, if a circumstance like this were to happen in your office and somebody has a situation and you let them lie on the floor for over 3 hours and you know that there's something going on, the police might start asking you questions of why did you wait so long? And that's where the criminality could potentially come in.
In this case, nobody even asked that. Nobody asked him that. Why did you wait so long? What's going on here? Like it never got investigated at a point like that.
One of our experts in the case, our retained forensic pathology expert, Dr. Judy Melanik, she testified both in deposition and at trial that the manner of death was homicide because of the delay. Yes. And she testified also because of the administration of the substances coupled with the delay, that would be akin to a homicide. And she believed the criminal prosecution should have resulted.
And since the trial, I've been calling and I have gotten the ear of the Orange County Sheriff's Department, somebody in their investigative unit, in their homicide unit, and they have contacted me back and they are investigating this homicide situation. I have been pushing the issue very strongly. I've made so many lengthy phone calls to try to get the attention of someone who would warrant the investigation of a homicide and get this man arrested for the death of my son. And these homicide investigators have called me back from the Orange County to ask me specific questions. They have received the transcripts from the courts. They are going through the transcripts in hopes that we can receive a homicide ruling on this situation and have our day back in court and get this man arrested for what he has done to our son.
Well, I am really glad to hear that is something that is happening. I'm so sorry that it's falling to you, John Paul, to have to push for that. It just seems like that would very much be the role of the state in pursuing this case.
I would hope so, but post-trial, nobody has done anything. Nobody in the state, nobody in any kind of executive position has done anything to say, hey, wait a minute. In that trial, this young boy's went from an accident to a homicide. This needs to be reinvestigated. This needs to be reopened. We need to look at this further post-trial. And nobody did that until I started making phone calls. And hopefully that's what's happening behind closed doors without me knowing. But I think that may have gotten the attention of somebody. I've called the governor's office. I've had lengthy conversations with people in the governor's office. I've sent emails to the governor's office. I've sent scheduling requests to request meeting with the governor. I am not stopping. I will not stop. This man is running free, spending money like wildfire, vacationing, partying, laughing, joyful, enjoying his life. I will not stop. Yeah. I'm very hurt. I'm very upset.
Well, I can appreciate why. I mean, it's this terrible, tragic thing happens. The systems fail you. You can't rely on the police to support this. You can't rely on the government. And on top of that, Chris Young is going on Netflix specials and spreading things that are factually untrue and collecting money and not paying taxes.
Yes.
I totally appreciate the
Thank
anger
you.
that you have.
Saying things like, "Oh, they pulled the plug. They pulled the plug on their boy." You know, like, he pulled the plug. This guy has no heart. There's nothing inside of him. He's empty. So when you see this person, it's very unsettling.
Mm. Yeah, I know that you all put in a request to have the episode of Unwell removed from Netflix. Where does that stand right now?
Mr. Begley has actually tried to get the attention of the producers of that particular Netflix docuseries. Hasn't had any response in light of the verdict because we've been dealing with the bankruptcy issues that Mr. Young has filed, as well as SoulQuest, which was thrown out of bankruptcy court, that being a legal organization. So I've been sort of more involved in that than anything else. But I think what we need to do is go to Netflix directly and basically apprise them that this particular production that is still on their platform is completely untrue. The statements that Mr. Young had incorporated in there, as far as putting the onus and blame on Brandon for his death, not only is exceptionally false, but it's exceptionally painful for not only John Paul, but for Holly.
Sure.
I'll never forget, it was August 12th, 2020. We had just filed the lawsuit in March. I was at home. It was a Sunday. And my phone lights up. Mr. Begley's calling me. I'm like, okay, let's see what's going on. Have you seen this? Have you seen what's out there right now? I just got a call from Brandon's mother. I can't believe this. I go right to Netflix. I turn it on, and I'm watching this hour-long show about ayahuasca. Dr. Grob, who was the defense expert psychiatrist in our wrongful death case, was one of the spokespeople. And we get about halfway through, and they start to feature SoulQuest and Mr. Young. And you hear the statement, we knew, everyone knew, that we did nothing wrong. And that Brandon basically died because of drinking too much water and not telling us that he had a psychiatric condition known as epilepsy. 22-year-old man with no prior medical history, he's got epilepsy. What are you basing it on, Mr. Young? Well, come to find out in the litigation, he was relying upon a statement in Brandon's autopsy report that Brandon had a drug called levetiracetam in his system. What that drug is known by, and the generic name is Keppra. It's an anticonvulsant medication that's given to you to prophylactically prevent you from suffering subsequent seizures. He was given that medication at the hospital, Florida Hospital East Orlando, on April 1st, 2018, because he was brought there in a seizure-like state.
Wow.
Of course, it's going to be in his postmortem bloodstream because it was administered by the physicians. Had Mr. Young had any semblance of understanding of what was going on, he would have recognized that there's no evidence to support that Brandon had epilepsy or any prior medical condition. And the court agreed with us on that issue, and we got summary judgment because of it. And what we've been hoping for is that Netflix would essentially just take the Unwell series down or delete out the part that is included where Mr. Young is essentially defaming Brandon's legacy by saying he lied to us. And then the callous statement, you lie, you die. It's like, I can't imagine any worse. And when I asked him about that in deposition and at trial, he more or less said that it was a warning to other people, that you have to be completely candid with us, and that you have to tell us about what's going on so that we know how to appropriately accept you or deny you based upon whether you're qualified to participate in an ayahuasca session. It was an extreme backtrack. I think to me it was just an opportunity for him to try to make people in the community believe that SoulQuest did nothing wrong, which I think to this day in their circle, which I guess has gotten smaller since SoulQuest no longer exists, people still on social media platforms say, oh, isn't that the young man or the boy who had a problem and didn't tell them about it? So the misinformation really has had a pervasive effect.
I mean, I think it at this point sort of fits the definition of libel.
In Florida, if it's someone who has expired, there's no basis for defamation of the person who has been deceased.
Oh, gosh.
I've reached out to Netflix. I've sent emails to both parties. I've left voice messages with both parties. I've never had a return phone call or any kind of return message from anybody.
And the beauty of the trial, to be quite honest, the jury did an exceptional job with the evidence, because not only did they find SoulQuest and Mr. Young liable, they also found that Brandon had zero responsibility for his death. And if
Wow.
that doesn't demonstrate the complete falsehood of what Mr. Young has been putting out in the community through Netflix, I don't know what.
Otherwise,
If you go to that website now, the SoulQuest website, you will essentially get a banner, a farewell letter that says
Oh, okay.
10 years, a tribute to 10 years of service. And it basically goes through and it itemizes why it is that the entity no longer is able to operate. Puts a lot of onus on Mr. Begley and myself for the litigation, and basically says that they've been falsely accused of illicit activity and doing unlawful things. That unfortunately the largeness of the verdict, which is over $15 million, has forced them to shut SoulQuest down, in conjunction with SoulQuest Chapter 11 bankruptcy case being thrown out of bankruptcy court because the bankruptcy judge concluded that the illegal operation in terms of the provision of Schedule 1 controlled substances without an exemption. That is correct.
So where do things stand with the judgment?
Judgment is finalized. The opportunity to appeal the judgment came and went. They did not, SoulQuest nor Mr. Young, elected to proceed with appeal, so the judgment is final. Since the Chapter 11 case as to SoulQuest has been thrown out of bankruptcy court, that case is now returned to Judge Netcher's jurisdiction in Orange County for post-judgment collection and enforcement. The Chapter 7 case, which is Mr. Young's personal bankruptcy case, is still pending before the bankruptcy court in the Middle District of Florida in Orlando. That case, while it's pending, we can't collect on the verdict as to Mr. Young personally. We can only go after SoulQuest for the portion of the judgment that SoulQuest is liable for. So we're working with the bankruptcy court to figure out what we're going to do with Mr. Young's situation, which according to his discussion at the meeting of creditors, he says he's bankrupt. He claims he has $0, even though he's got a $3,500 a month Mercedes-Benz payment. He's got a $3,000 a month mortgage payment. He's got a $3,000 RV luxury item that he pays monthly. It's got some pretty hefty bills, and the disclosures that we've received during the course of the post-judgment enforcement have indicated more than $13 million was earned by SoulQuest from 2019 until its ultimate closure in July of 2024. What we're having a hard time figuring out is where it all went. That was tax-free money, because that money went directly from PayPal to SoulQuest Church of Mother Earth, Inc. Now, it did get filtered down, some of it, to Mr. Young, because he was taking money not only as a salary, but he was also getting paid what's called a parsonage, which I had no idea what a parsonage is, but essentially it's a stipend that is given to religious leaders. Like if you had a pastor or a priest at a church, they can give a parsonage to pay for that priest's living and lifestyle, like in terms of their rent and their house and things like that. Mr. Young was paying himself $60,000 in a parsonage for all of his expenses, and then paying himself another $260,000 in annual income for work at SoulQuest president. Yeah, so he was making over $300,000 a year. But the problem that I foresee with the documentation is I can't account for where the millions went. I know that there was money spent, and since the judgment, Mr. Young has had some cryptocurrency that he liquidated through Bitcoin. Several $100,000, but most of it's already been spent for legal bills for his defense and things like that. And we have another meeting. It was continued by the United States trustee. The meeting has been continued to October 9th. So next week, next Wednesday, there's going to be a further discussion as to whether or not the United States trustee is going to be recommending that Chapter 7 bankruptcy is appropriate for Mr. Young. In light of all the lavish spending, it just seems a little out of bounds, but that's not my purview. So we'll see what the court has to say. But yeah, our plan is to try to enforce upon the judgments through SoulQuest as well as Mr. Young if he is relinquished from Chapter 7 bankruptcy. One of the arguments we're going to try to make is that Brandon's wrongful death judgment should not be discharged by bankruptcy because of the illegality and culpable negligence associated with Brandon's death. Essentially, one of the arguments that we are looking into is now that the federal appeals are going to be exhausted with regard to the religious exemption claims, and SoulQuest has been declared to be an illegal organization by the bankruptcy court, is the corporate veil no longer protecting the individual corporate officers? Are they now essentially RICO co-conspirators for participating in an illegal act that resulted in a debt, i.e. Brandon's wrongful death judgment, such that those individuals are personally liable? That's
wow. Well, glad to have an attorney to explain all of that. So it does sound like there's some optimism in terms of just being able to move forward, even if the full amount of the judgment is never kind of collected.
There's a lot of money that was made, more than I ever thought. I mean, I always had some inkling that this was a profitable business, but when I got the PayPal disclosures, I was amazed. I mean, it was over $150,000 to $200,000 a month, consistently. And that's just PayPal money. That's not cash that people were paying on site for other things. So this was a very, very lucrative business. One of the things that I think Mr. Begley, Ms. Cat, and myself find some level of vindication is that this organization, even if they don't satisfy the judgment fully, which I don't think that they can, I don't think they have $15 million plus the interest that's accumulated on the judgment. The fact that the organization is no longer operating and is prevented from hurting other people, I think really is what the family wanted, and I think it's what Brandon would have wanted. And the hardest thing about all this is Brandon was a big supporter of psychedelic medicine. This was not somebody who was a novice. This is not someone who was just going there to figure out, hey, let's see if this is a good experience. He really believed that this was beneficial. He actually enjoyed the SoulQuest experience. He liked the people up there. He actually enjoyed going and spending time there. And when they failed him, when Chris Young failed him, I think that's the biggest tragedy of all, because he put so much trust and faith in these people and really expected them to do the right thing. And when he needed the help the most, there was nobody there for him.
I think Chris Young really presents himself as this sort of institutional leader and somebody who has this great training and this like secret knowledge. And if you do what he says, you too can take part in the healing. And I think that's so hard to navigate when you're a regular person trying to sort through big existential questions. And I think is one of the dangers of these psychedelic churches is that it gives people kind of unchecked power in these religious communities that they wouldn't have if they were working in the medical establishment or working as therapists.
The lack of some type of standards, and I recognize, when it's religiosity, it's a little bit more difficult to have a platform of standardized administration. But because of the effects that the substance has on people, and what I've learned about it from a medicinal standpoint in the case, you would think that there would be some consensus in the community as to what would be a safe, appropriate response. I know the ICEERS organization has put out standards. I mean, I think that's a good start. And if Brandon were here with us, I mean, I think what Brandon would want the most from this tragedy is that people in the psychedelic community are safer. If you could learn from this awful situation, the fact that we will never have Brandon back, I think he would want this to be a learning opportunity. I think some of the people that were at SoulQuest that Brandon was friendly with, notably the woman I told you who was the lead facilitator, she has been pushing for that she hopes that this awful tragedy is something that we all learn from and don't make the mistake again. And one of the things the defense argued at trial, as you would expect, is that, this is a rare case that hardly ever happens. Thank God. Let's hope it doesn't happen, because this was so egregious on a condition that really just requires a little sodium, which means if you gave him some salt water, you put a bag of saline on him early enough, not a medical issue that's going to take your life. And that's one of the things our emergency medicine and medical toxicology experts said. The cure rate for this condition is over 90% if treated timely. And that's where this whole case went sideways. So when this case came in, the first thing I'm thinking of is he needs medical treatment immediately. Time is of the essence. Time is what we're losing. And that was our theme at trial, is lost time. Not only lost time because of the failure to treat, but now lost time because of the consequences. We've lost Brandon and now the family doesn't get the time that they deserve. The tragedy it's like throwing a stone in the water. The ripple effect hits everybody that was in Brandon's life.
Having been involved in this case and seen how SoulQuest operated, what ideas do you all have or suggestions for ways of making psychedelic experiences safer for people?
I just think you just have to do more due diligence, you have to do more research, dive into the facilitators themselves, the instruction that the facilitators are giving, the experiences that the facilitators have, their knowledge, their education. And you have to really look at them as if they're medicinal doctors, or they're people who they're giving you medicine. It's something that you're going to put into your body. Further research on the compounds, whatever they're putting into your body, the amounts that they're putting in your body, the dosage levels. You have to ask very specific questions. Has it been tested? How do you make it? Where is it made? How is it made? Who makes it? There are just so many questions that you should be asking before you put something into your body, especially if it's going to have the effect that it does. And if you're seeking answers that you are seeking, I think that you could only benefit in the end by having a better experience, knowing that it's going to be safer for you, and that you are going to have a better outcome. We never thought that it would kill Brandon, but there were an obscene amount of circumstances which led to that. And if I myself, as a father and as a parent, and it bothers me every day, if I would have known more and have asked more questions myself, if I would have done more due diligence, if I would have done more research, I wouldn't have let him go. But I just think the more information that you have, the better that you are able to make a sound decision.
I think institutionally, too, the actual facilities, if you want to call them that are going to be administering the substances, having some type of protocols in place or having medical personnel on site of some kind, which SoulQuest ultimately did after Brandon's tragedy. They started hiring certified emergency medical technicians. They actually had a medical director on staff who was, I don't think, on premises all the time, but at least they recognized that there was a need to have medical professionals there to recognize complications and determine when those complications require immediate medical intervention versus the type of response that Mr. Young had with Brandon, which is, I don't know what that is. It's probably just an adverse reaction to the medicine. He'll be fine. That's the thing that I think needs to be worked on amongst people in the community is how much knowledge do we have? And candidly, the entities that have been given exemption through the Drug Enforcement Administration, the UDV, the Santa Dame, I haven't heard any issues coming from their side of the table. And I think the reason is because they've convinced the Drug Enforcement Administration that the practices that they're participating in are safe. So they probably should be the example of what to follow if you're going to do this. And SoulQuest actually did have a safety, storage, and I think it was administration protocol that was pretty extensive, and it was borrowed, you can tell, it was borrowed from the ICER's example of safety. And it just wasn't followed in Brandon's case. The dosing and getting help immediately, and the idea that we don't worry about the legal complications, we'll make the phone call to get you help. None of that was followed. And I think that's where this all went sideways. And I don't think it's that complicated. The other thing that I think people in the community have to be careful of is when you start mixing different substances. Kambo, the ayahuasca, in close proximity of time. I understand that in the indigenous, these substances are given close in time with those people. I don't know if that's the smartest and safest process in Brandon's case, because when you look at the circumstances, it certainly seems like it was such a taxing event on his body that he wasn't able to get through it. And that's another issue I think that has to be looked at.
That is one of the comments I've heard from people in the psychedelic community, that's a pretty unusual combination of the kambo and the ayahuasca. And the pre-salt, the no salt diet leading up to the ayahuasca is also problematic.
Correct. The water instructions that were given in Brandon's case were never really fully and clearly explained by Mr. Young. It was basically, we don't give more than 1 liter. But then you look at the instructions that they have in writing that were given to the Orange County Sheriff's Office one day after Brandon's transport to the hospital. And it says, 2 liters, but no more than 5 liters within a 20-minute period of time. That's extremely dangerous. So, yeah, that needs to have some clarification. And if you're going to do the combo, whether or not an excessive water intake is even necessary, when you talk to experts like I have in that area, a lot of them will tell you that they don't even believe in giving water in this set of circumstances. It's just silliness.
Yeah.
A lot of times they say, well, we're doing it because we want to see some type of productive purge. We want you to throw something up so that you have something in your stomach and it's not going to be retching. Mr. Young sort of explained that to me in deposition. That's why we tell them to drink so much water. It's just a really tough combination when you've gone through 3 days of purging with ayahuasca, which is going to cause, according to the medical experts, SIADH to begin with. And then you're going to compound that water retention with more water intake and no food. It's a recipe, as Dr. Bialkin, who was the retained nephrology expert for the defense, testified to me at trial, it was the perfect storm of disaster.
They actually tried to make a tea to give to Brandon, and they put it in a bottle and squirted it down his throat because they thought he was diabetic. So they tried to give him sugar water thinking that he was diabetic. They tried to remedy the situation without even knowing what the situation was.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Here he is in an obtunded state, and they're squirting liquid down the man's throat, and he's aspirating this liquid, and he can't do anything about it. Oh, let's beat him with some leaves. Oh, let's blow some smoke on him. Get him a mat to lay down on.
Yeah.
Don't call the EMT. Don't call 911. Go to the store and get something to make something with so we can give it to him to see if we can counteract the problem that we don't even know what's going on.
This is a problem in all psychedelics. I see it in psychedelic therapy, that there's this interpretation of bad things that happen as like part of the process. And it makes people not recognize what's really going on, whether it's someone developing HPPD or derealization, or in a situation like that where someone is really suffering from overhydration and needs sort of medical intervention.
And you're essentially killing the kid.
I'm so sorry that your family has had to go through all of this. It's just unimaginable.
Thank you. The most unimaginable part for me.
Yeah.
And when I hear you speak about my family, my heart doesn't come to mind. Holly's heart doesn't come to mind, although it does. I have a 7-year-old son at home who asks where his brother is. And then he says things to me in the middle of the night, waking up crying, saying things like, I don't want to die. I don't want to die like my brother. The ripple that hits the shores when you throw the pond in the middle, it's destroying everybody around us. And this man is just free as a bird. And it's wrong. The system is wrong. The justice system is wrong. Everything that's happened is wrong. This man right here is our angel. If it wasn't for this man, we wouldn't be sitting in front of you today. No one would have spoken for Brandon. Something has to happen here. Somebody has to hear this. Somebody has to see it. Somebody has to go, you know what? We've got to do something down there. Please.
There were several law firms that he went to before he got to me. Nobody wanted to pursue the case because the potential for recovery was very much uncertain. Even though SoulQuest has a very large financial bankroll, as we found out after the fact, they don't own the land, but they were operating on a pretty nice parcel of land. Nobody wanted to take it on because there's no insurance. So most lawyers are like, it's going to cost us money. How are we going to do this? A lot of my colleagues tell me I'm crazy for taking it on because there was a substantial sum of money that our firm invested into the case to prosecute it, and we had to take it all the way to the end. But there is a level of vindication that he was able to stand resolute and take this even after multiple firms told him, we can't help you. The Orange County Sheriff's Office, no, there's nothing we can do. The prosecutor's office, no, can't really do much for you. He said, you know what, Bill, if you can do anything, do the best you can. And the more I got into the case, the more I just could not turn away from it, because it would have been an absolute injustice if Brandon's death would have gotten swept under the rug. And sadly, if we didn't do this, it would have. And even now, what SoulQuest and Mr. Young are doing with the bankruptcy proceeding, they're still not taking responsibility. Even though we do have the judgment, and the judgment speaks for itself, you will still hear whispers in the community that people that support SoulQuest, I don't know who they are, but they're out there, saying that they had nothing to do with this. It's not fault. And that's the scary part about it. And I know Mr. Young, in that farewell letter, if you go to the website, you'll see it. He's more or less suggesting that if you're looking to open up an ayahuasca retreat, I'm more than happy to give you guidance. You don't know if that's the individual that you want to have providing the type of guidance for you.
I think that's my gut sense of this, is that it's probably only a matter of time before he sets up another one.
He already is.
There is some indication that his significant other at the time, who attended the trial every single day, she has opened up an organization in Pensacola called the Sacred Vine. It's the name of the church. And essentially, she's trying to revive SoulQuest membership by soliciting the comment to that organization. They do not have DEA exemption that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I don't know what Mr. Young's involvement is. I think he'll claim that he has zero. But if you look into it, there's not that much separation between the two of them. She seems to want to use SoulQuest proprietary information, i.e. their client lists, their member lists, to bring people to her side. And they're currently using an indigenous individual from the Brazil Amazonian rainforest who was affiliated with SoulQuest. That's going to be essentially their shaman, I guess. So there seems to be some overlap. How much, I don't know at this juncture, but your fear, I think, is very much ours, is that this is just an opportunity to transition and change SoulQuest to a different.
Is there anything else that either of you would like to share that hasn't come up that you feel like is important for people to know?
Love one another. Take care of each other.
I think there's some great things in the community. I'm not someone who's willing to partake, but I have met a lot of people in the area who were not affiliated with SoulQuest, experts, people that have taken the psychedelics. I just would hate for that opportunity to be squandered by allowing people to improperly provide these substances, resulting in catastrophes and tragedies like Brandon, which will forever strip that opportunity, because now the danger is so bad that you don't even want to give an opportunity to branch out. Maybe there is a benefit from this, but it needs to be studied, and there needs to be some standardization to it. And I think we all need to, in the community, need to learn from that to provide the best and optimal outcome, because maybe it does benefit people. I don't know. I'm on the fence about it. I just know that from the legalities of the case, no family should ever have to experience the loss of their 22-year-old son merely because he needs a bag of saline within a few hours of suffering hyponatremia. That just cannot happen.
Since recording this episode in the fall of 2024, there have been several developments in the Begley case. I recently spoke with William Chapman, the attorney representing Brandon's family, for an update. SoulQuest Church's attempt at Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection was dismissed by the federal bankruptcy court in Orlando. The judge ruled they weren't eligible for protection due to illegally providing DMT, a Schedule I controlled substance. Chris Young's personal Chapter 7 bankruptcy case remains pending, with Chapman working to have Young's liability exempted from discharge. This is particularly significant as financial records show SoulQuest earned over $14 million, yet Young and the church claim to have had no assets. On December 4th, 2024, another ayahuasca center called Our Sacred Sanctuary in Eustis, Florida, which employed several former SoulQuest staff members, was raided by the DEA and has ceased operations. In a new development, Young's associate Sylvania De Brito has established Sacred Vine Church, operating out of Mandela House in Pensacola, Florida. While DeBrito appears to be distancing herself from SoulQuest, the operation seems to be targeting SoulQuest's former members. Chapman is investigating whether Young has any involvement in this new church. The Begley family and Chapman continue their efforts to locate SoulQuest's and Young's assets as they pursue collection of the $15 million judgment. The Psychedelic Skeptic was created by me, Dr. Ann Metz. Our podcast music is by West Swing. The Psychedelic Skeptic is available on your favorite podcast app. And you can learn more at annmetz.com or follow me on Instagram at Dr. Metz. If you want to recommend a guest for the show or ask a question about psychedelic therapy, just send me a note at hello@annmetz.com. If you want to help the podcast, please share it with a friend or a family member. Or if you're feeling particularly generous, feel free to leave a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.